Okay, the name of the story is Detective Sonic the Musical. I decided to do something a little different with this narration. Not only did I record a bunch of new voice clips for it, I also decided to use some of my older voice clips to, save some time, make it a little easier. The older voice clips aren't that old, but I recorded them last month. Back then I decided it would be fun to voice act parts of the story just for the heck of it. I've wanted to narrate this story ever since I wrote it, but I've had a lot of difficulty, but I'm going to try my best here. Here I go. Sonic and Tails had finished foiling the plans of Dr. Eggman once again a few days ago, and today they were hanging out at one of the parks in Station Square. Sonic was glad they'd saved the day, but he couldn't help but feel like something wasn't quite right. You know, Tails... Yeah? Tails replied. Ever since we defeated Eggman again, it feels like these days are going by really slowly, said Sonic. You know, it does, Tails agreed. But I think you're just bored, Sonic. Yeah, pretty much. Well, I have an idea, said Tails. What if we put together a musical? You can star in it along with me and some of our friends, and we can sing together. Cool, Sonic smiled. Great idea, Tails. You're a genius. But before we get started, there's something I need you to keep in mind, Tails said as he raised his forefinger for an additional comment. Coming up with the idea of a musical was the easy part, but the hard part is thinking of what happens in the musical. Oh, Sonic's expression quickly changed to slight disappointment. Yeah, not wrong there. So let's take a minute to think. What should our musical be about? Tails wanted to know. He and Sonic began to brainstorm, but as they tried to come up with some good ideas, Sonic's nose began to twitch. Something was tickling his nose. It must have been his allergies, he figured. He lowered his eyelids and tilted his neck back. He was about to sneeze. Achoo! Sonic doubled over as he sneezed, making sure to cover it with his elbow as he did. He then stood back up, rubbing his nose with his forefinger. Bless you, Tails said politely. Thanks. Sonic continued to rub his nose for a few seconds. Then, however, his eyes lit up as he smiled. Bingo! What is it, Sonic? Tails asked out of curiosity. What if we make a musical about sneezing? Sonic suggested as he removed his forefinger from his nose. Maybe something could be making us sneeze, and I could be a detective who tries to figure it out. Tails smiled as well. You know, Sonic, that's a brilliant idea. I know, right? That being said, I think this plot has been used for a musical before, Tails then added. Have you ever watched Sesame Street? Only when I'm babysitting and the kids want me to watch it with them, Sonic replied. There was a segment where a certain red character did a musical where he was a detective, and he was trying to figure out why 3 different characters were sneezing, Tails explained. We can base our musical off of that. Sounds good, Sonic said. But then he realized something, upon which he asked, a bit seriously, Is this the same character who has an even higher-pitched voice than Mario and speaks in the third person? Yes, but that's because that's his character, Tails said. You don't have to follow all his lines verbatim just because you're in his role. You can speak the way you always do if you'd like. Alright. With that, Sonic and Tails called a few of their friends, in this case, Knuckles, Amy, and Rouge. They offered them roles in the musical, and they accepted. They were also able to talk Eggman into joining the musical. They thought it would make perfect sense if he turned out to be the culprit, but he wasn't too impressed when they told him the ending of the original. He offered to change the ending a bit, but he told them they wouldn't tell him what would happen instead until the time was right. Sonic and Tails didn't know what he was talking about, but they agreed nonetheless. That being said, both Tails and Knuckles wanted to be Sonic's detective assistant, a role only one of them could have, for the show. They settled their little dispute with a quick game of rock, paper, scissors against Sonic. Tails tried it first and lost, while Knuckles tried it next and turned out to be the winner. Knuckles didn't really want to be one of the singers anyway. He mentioned he was better at rapping than singing. Tails not only agreed, but mentioned that it would be a nice change of pace to give Knuckles the role of Sonic's sidekick for once. Finally everything was ready, and the musical, like the mystery within it, was about to commence. Sonic and his co-stars were quite excited for the performance, but they kept themselves calm and collected so they wouldn't have to worry about making any mistakes. This was going to be great. Sonic opened the door and headed into his office, wearing a detective hat and a dark blue trench coat as he did. He sat down at his desk and stretched his arms up over his head, a satisfied and confident smile on his face. Another day of solving crimes is about to begin, Sonic said to himself. The door opened and in walked Knuckles, also dressed in appropriate detective attire. "Good morning, Detective Sonic," the echidna greeted him as he made his way over to the desk. "Morning, Assistant," Sonic replied. "Got everything you need for the day?" Knuckles wanted to know. "You bet I do." Sonic pointed to what he had on his desk. "I've got a detective smartphone, a detective notepad, a detective magnifying glass, and a detective comic book." "Why would you need a detective comic book?" Knuckles asked, raising an eyebrow. "You know, so I have something to read while I'm waiting for my first case," Sonic replied, flipping through a few pages of said comic book. Suddenly his smartphone rang, and there it is. Sonic immediately closed his book and put it aside. Then he reached over to his phone, picked it up, pressed the green button, and held it to one side of his head. "Hello, Detective Sonic the Hedgehog here. How can I help you?" Shoot! He was greeted by a sound of Tails sneezing, which surprised him a bit. Detective Sonic? Yeah? You gotta help me. Achoo! Another sneeze from Tails. "Station Square Apartments, floor 5, room 4. Come right away. Achoo!" Sonic then hung up before placing his smartphone in his pocket for later. His notepad and magnifying glass went into his pockets as well. "Looks like we gotta get to Station Square Apartments right away," said Sonic. And then Knuckles took Sonic's hand. "Perhaps I could help with that," said Knuckles. The two of them jumped, and the next thing they knew they were at Tails' apartment. Tails had been sitting at a table that had a pizza box on it, and he'd been holding a prop slice of pizza in one of his hands. "Achoo!" Tails sneezed into his arm, then wiped his nose with it. He looked relieved to see that Sonic and Knuckles had arrived, however. Finally. Where you been?" Achoo!" As Tails rubbed his nose with his forefinger, Sonic said, "Well, tell me and my detective assistant what's wrong." "Well..." Tails removed his forefinger and began to sing as the first musical number began. The background music for this one was rather jazzy, and as he sang, Sonic brought out his notepad and took some notes. "I was feeling kind of hungry. I ordered pizza with cheese. But when the pizza got here, I started to sneeze and sneeze and sneeze and sneeze. You're telling me you started to sneeze," Sonic sang. "The sneezing hasn't stopped. I couldn't figure what to do. So I dropped my pepperoni slice, grabbed the phone, and called, achoo, achoo." Sonic sneezed as well, and for about 3 seconds, the two of them were sneezing. Or were they perhaps faking their sneezing? It was hard to tell, along to the music until it had finished. That was when they both rubbed their noses with their hands. Sonic rubbed his nose with the back of his hand, while Tails did the same with the side of his hand. I gotta tell you, though, I'm still pretty hungry," Tails mentioned, sniffling. He brought his other hand to take a bite of his slice of pizza when... "Wait!" Sonic called. Tails lowered a slice of pizza, watching as the hedgehog brought out his magnifying glass and used it to analyze what the fox was holding. The top of it was covered with black specks. There's not just pepperoni on this pizza. It looks like there's pepper, too." "Pepper?" Tails' eyes were wide with disbelief. "You're kidding." To prove it to him, Sonic took a deep breath and blew, causing a cloud of pepper to rise into Tails' face. The fox's irises shrunk, and he placed his forefinger underneath his nose as he tried to keep himself from sneezing. It wasn't working, however. Achoo, achoo, achoo. "Tails, do you remember who delivered this pizza?" Sonic asked as Tails rubbed his nose repeatedly with his forefinger. Tails sniffled. "Well, he was shaped sort of like a box. A solid object with 6 identical square sides. What you might call a cube." "You mean like this?" Sonic showed Tails his notepad, revealing he'd drawn a perfect outline of a cube along with his notes. Yeah," Tails said with a nod. Sonic put his forefinger to his chin and thought. This is a real mystery. This detective is gonna need a lead. His smartphone rang again, and he brought it out of his coat pocket and answered. Hello, Detective Sonic the Hedgehog. He heard a different sneeze, one that sounded quite feminine and dainty. Detective Sonic? Yes. I need your help. Crystal Gem Manor. Sonic hung up his phone and turned to look at Knuckles. Knux, do your stuff. I'm on it. Knuckles took Sonic's hand. The two of them jumped, and the next thing they knew, they were in the living room of Crystal Gem Manor. As for whether this was Rouge's actual home or just a fictional setting designed for the musical, Sonic couldn't remember. Rouge sneezed into her free hand, with her other hand holding a bouquet of synthetic flowers. She then rubbed her nose with her forefinger, looking embarrassed as she was sitting on her velvet sofa. Jeez, more sneezing, Sonic said in disbelief. Tell me what happened, Rouge. Well, Rouge started before she sang the next musical number, the background of which was performed mainly with wind instruments. Sonic took some notes of what she sang as well, trying not to be distracted by the bat's lovely singing voice. I was feeling glum and gloomy. My mood was down to my knees. So I ordered this bouquet, then I started to sneeze and sneeze and sneeze and sneeze. Could you sing with me this time? It'll help me remember the clues, Sonic suggested before he joined in. You're telling me you started to sneeze. The sneezing hasn't stopped. I had no idea what to do. So I put down the bouquet, picked up my phone, and called. Achoo! Achoo! Another sneeze from Sonic. For the next few seconds, Sonic and Rouge were sneezing in time to the music. When they were finished, Sonic put his forefinger underneath his nose as Rouge prepared to give a final sneeze. And just like that, she was rubbing her nose again with her forefinger, ever so gently. I must say, though, they are lovely, Rouge said with a sniffle. Sonic brought out his magnifying glass and looked through it to inspect the flowers. These flowers have pepper in them. Pepper? Rouge couldn't believe it. Don't be ridiculous. Sonic took a sniff of the flowers, and as the familiar spicy aroma filled his nostrils, he sneezed quite loudly, with the resulting air he expelled sending up a few swirls of black powder. Ha-shoo! Shoo! Shoo! Ha-shoo! Rouge sneezed 3 times from the cloud of pepper, and then she and Sonic rubbed their noses, almost in unison. Gesundheit, Knuckles said. He'd covered his nose with his hand so he wouldn't inhale the pepper that had risen. Most of the spice had now descended to the floor anyway. Thank you, said Rouge. Thanks, said Sonic. He kept his eyes on Rouge, however, as his forefinger rubbed his nose. Rouge, do you remember who delivered them? It was an odd-looking young man, Rouge stated, sniffling lightly. Did he look like this? Sonic showed Rouge his notepad, revealing his drawing of the cube. Oh, yes, Rouge said with a nod, recognizing the shape. She brought out a handkerchief and wiped her nose gingerly with it. As she did, Sonic placed his notepad back in his pocket. The cube strikes again, he acknowledged. I've got to stop that thing before he does it. His smartphone rang, interrupting him. Again. He brought out his phone and answered. Hello, Detective Sonic. Detective Sonic! Achoo! The voice on the other line was also a feminine voice, but it sounded much different from Rouge's. Come to the Station Square Theater. Dressing room number 6 at once. Achoo! Fasten your seatbelts, Knuckles said as Sonic hung up his phone. He took his hand, and the two of them jumped. The next thing they knew, they were at the aforementioned dressing room of Station Square Theater. Amy sneezed rather extendedly, then rubbed her nose cutely with her forefinger. For this musical, she was wearing a bright pink jacket with sparkles in addition to her usual dress. Oh, thank goodness! What kept you?
Achoo!
She sneezed again, rubbed her nose again. No way! Amy is sneezing too? Sonic couldn't believe it. I must be getting closer.
Aw, how can I perform in this condition? Achoo!
Amy let out another sneeze, making sure to put her arm over her mouth. It was clear that she was in despair, however.
How? Achoo!
Calm down, Amy, Sonic said as Amy rubbed her nose again, this time with her hand. Tell me and my assistant what happened.
Well,
Amy began to sing, setting off the third musical number. There was piano music with some strings for this one, which was rather fitting given her mood.
my old glitter-peppered parka became infested with fleas. So I ordered a replacement, then I started to sneeze and sneeze and sneeze and sneeze.
Then it feels with me, Sonic said. Here we go. You're kidding me, you started to sneeze.
The sneezing hasn't stopped. I have no notion what to do. A critic's in the house tonight. Can you just imagine her? Achoo!
Achoo! Sonic sneezed again, and the two of them took turns sneezing in time to the music, until a final sneeze from Amy finished the song. Once again, Sonic rubbed his nose when he was done sneezing.
Achoo! Oh well,
Amy said as she rubbed her nose again with her forefinger.
I've had a good career. It had to end sometime.
She turned away from Sonic for a few more sneezes, putting her hand over her mouth. Luckily, these weren't real sneezes, so her hand didn't get sprayed. Amy, this may sound weird, but take off your parka, Sonic asked, noticing that something was a bit off with the parka Amy was wearing.
What?
Amy was a bit taken aback.
And disappoint my public? Never! This show must go... Hey!
Before she could finish, Sonic pulled down the zipper to her parka, then took it off for her. He then looked at it through his magnifying glass. Amy was a bit dismayed and embarrassed, but at least she was still wearing a dress. Before she could say anything more, however, she had to sneeze a few more times, making sure to cover them with her arm. Well, will you look at that? Sonic said, realizing what was wrong with the parka. Real pepper in a glitter-peppered parka.
Diabolical! Achoo!
Amy sneezed again.
Who would do such a dastardly thing? Achoo! Achoo!
Well, who delivered your parka? Sonic wanted to know. Amy wiped her nose with her hand before she spoke.
Oh, well, my dresser, of course,
she claimed.
He manages my makeup and my...
She stopped herself as her eyes went wide.
Wait, come to think of it, it wasn't my dresser. It was some other chap. Some other chap who looked like...
Sonic showed Amy his notepad, showing her his drawing of the cube from earlier.
This? Like a cube?
Amy couldn't believe it, but she recognized it almost as soon as she saw it.
Actually, yes. Yes, a boxy fellow with 6 identical square sides.
Well, where did the boxy fellow go, Amy? Sonic wanted to know.
Actually, he was on his way out as you were coming in,
said Amy. Sonic and Knuckles' eyes widened with disbelief.
He must still be here.
Well, come on, Detective Assistant, let's investigate, Sonic said to Knuckles. With that, the two quickly searched the theater, with Sonic using his super speed and Knuckles gliding and climbing things to ensure neither of them left a stone unturned. It took them a few minutes, but finally Sonic spotted something that was behind the curtains before him. Aha! A cube! Said Sonic. I'm not a cube, a voice replied, but Sonic had a feeling it was lying. Yes, you are. The voice sighed. Okay. But I'm not behind the drapes. Sonic turned his head to look behind him. Tails? Going up? Tails called, having made it to the theater at just the right time. The fox spun both of his tails as he flew up to the rope that the drapes were connected to. He then wrapped both of his hands around the rope and pulled, descending as he did. The curtains were lifted, indeed revealing a robot that had a cube-shaped body, a cube for a head, and 4 rather thin mechanical limbs. It held a pepper shaker in one of its arms. Ha! Gotcha! Sonic said triumphantly. Amy, Rouge, and now Tails were all standing behind him, while Knuckles had glided behind the robot, though none of them were looking too amused.
Nuts,
the robot said, throwing its arm up in exasperation. Some of the pepper that was in its shaker found its way into Knuckles' face, causing his nose to twitch for a few seconds. With that, Knuckles lowered his eyelids, brought his neck back with an inhale, and then released a triple sneeze, bringing his upper body forward with each release. He then sulked as he rubbed his nose with his fist. Great. I was wondering when I was going to sneeze.
It's the cube!
Amy said in disbelief, as if no one quite got it.
And it's a robot!
And look, this cube has a pepper shaker, Sonic pointed out. He then turned to the robot and asked, "Why the heck did you use pepper to make me and all our friends sneeze?"
"Because I wanted to be needed,"
the robot claimed. It then sulked in sadness.
"Nobody needs a cube."
Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Amy, and Rouge all looked at the robot, their eyes wide with disbelief. They couldn't help but look at each other in their silence.
"Don't be silly. My cubes are needed everywhere,"
Amy mentioned. She sang a brief song about how some people did need cubes, but Sonic and Tails didn't pay much attention to its melody, its lyrics, or what it contributed to the moment. They just let her sing until she was finished, as did Knuckles, Rouge, and the robot.
Okay, I get it now,"
the robot replied at the end of the song.
"Cubes can be needed. Ice cubes, sugar cubes, but not this cube, not me."
It made a few quiet sobbing noises, wiping one of its eyes with its free arm. "Are we supposed to be feeling bad for this guy?" Knuckles privately asked Tails. "He's the one who made us sneeze, after all."
"Yes, but there's a twist to this ending,"
Tails replied quietly.
"You'll know when it comes." "Oh, poor unhappy lad,"
Amy lamented in sympathy for the robot.
"Whose bitter tears fall like acid rain upon the Finger Lakes which are mine heart."
Wait a minute, Sonic said, holding his hands out to interrupt the mood. He pointed to a white object that was poking out of the top of the robot's head. "I see something. You see that? Maybe you're not an ice cube or a sugar cube."
"Oh, nice. Rub it in. Thanks,"
the robot replied, sarcastically.
"You're a cube-shaped box of tissues, aren't you?"
Sonic declared. His friends gasped in shock, with the exception of Tails.
"What?"
Knuckles asked.
"Excuse me?"
Rouge couldn't believe her ears.
"Are you kidding me?"
Amy demanded. Deep down, she was thinking,
"A box of tissues was what was making us sneeze? That's the craziest idea I've ever heard."
"What a coincidence. That's the very thing we need most," Sonic mentioned. "What with all the sneezing we've been through." He reached over and pulled the white object out of the cube, only for the glow in its eyes to turn red for a moment before fading away. The robot lowered its neck and stopped moving, although sparks began to appear around it.
"What the?"
Knuckles asked. "What's happening?" Tails wanted to know. "Mwah-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha!" An evil laugh filled the air. The five looked up, only to see a familiar ship descending into view. "Surprise, you pathetic fools!" "Holy chaos," Knuckles said, putting his hand to his forehead in disbelief. "Dr. Eggman?" Sonic was shocked at first, but then accusingly pointed his forefinger at him. "So you're the culprit!" "Indeed I am. And now it's my turn!" A hard rock theme began as Eggman proceeded on to the final musical number. It was one that was completely different from the one that was in the original version of this musical. He must have made this one up on his own. "I'm sick of being beaten by the fastest thing alive. He foiled each one of my plans no matter what I tried. I had to get more cunning, that's what I had to do. So I took one of my robots and disguised him as a cube. He helped me cause you all to sneeze, so I could bask in your miseries. And when he asked for your sympathies, that was just a trap. He was voiced by me." "But if I was the one always beating you, why'd you make my friends sneeze instead of just me?" Sonic asked, somewhat interrupting the song, although the music continued. "It's really quite simple," Eggman said. "I thought if I made Tails sneeze by giving him a pepper-covered pizza, he wouldn't be able to fly with his tail so easily. And if I made Rouge sneeze by tricking her into smelling peppered flowers, she wouldn't be able to warn Knuckles about my plants. And he wouldn't be able to warn you either. And as for Amy, I give her 2 parkas, one with fleas on it and one with pepper on it. Because that's what she gets for outsmarting my Zero robot I sent to pursue her years ago. I had my cube robot carry out all those tasks so you'd think he was responsible for your suffering. Maybe the jig is up, but what matters is, I've got you right where I want you. Sonic and his friends were absolutely shocked, but before any of them could call him out, Eggman resumed singing. And now that I'm believed, you have all been deceived. I succeeded where you have been stunned. Bow down to your ruler, he's 100 times cooler. At last, Dr. Eggman has won. Yes, I, Dr. Eggman, have won. After a few more seconds, the music ended. Sonic and his friends kept their eyes wide, not believing what they'd heard. Their baffled reactions were completely genuine. That was awful, Knuckles said, rather bluntly. If that was your attempt at becoming the next Chris Kirkpatrick, I can't say you've succeeded, Rouge mentioned, lowering her eyelids. That was when Sonic brought himself back into the moment. What he heard might have been beyond his expectations, but he knew he had to finish this musical. You are so going down, Eggman, Sonic said bravely. Bring it on, you blue cartoon, Eggman snapped. He charged towards Sonic, but he jumped at the right moment and hit him before landing back on the ground. As Sonic and Eggman fought and the music resumed, Tails, Knuckles, Amy, and Rouge looked on, with the girls being worried about Sonic. A few hits later, Sonic caused Eggman's ship to begin to combust, but the villain wasn't finished yet. He pressed a button that caused the robotic arm to come out of the bottom of the ship, and then the arm picked up the pepper shaker that the cube robot had been holding earlier. After unscrewing the lid, Eggman threw the contents of the pepper shaker into Sonic's face. Ah! Sonic winced and threw his hands over his eyes for a moment. When he pulled his hands away, everyone could see that his nose was twitching and trembling uncontrollably, a sign that he was going to sneeze again. Oh no, Tails said to himself. Everyone stand back, Knuckles commanded. As Eggman fell from his ship and landed on the floor without so much as a scratch, Sonic's eyes fell closed as he tilted his neck backward. His breath began to hitch. Sonic inhaled. What's the matter? Don't you like it spicy? Eggman asked, tauntingly. Sonic gave an enormous breath, with Amy covering her eyes and Tails plugging his ears. And then he finally exploded, shooting his upper body forwards. The amount of air that Sonic expelled from his mouth and nose was so massive and so powerful that it blew Eggman right out of the theater. Or it seemed to. As he disappeared into the distance, the others could hear him screaming his final line. I hate that hedgehog! Once Sonic had lost his breath, he stood back up and began rubbing his nose with his index finger. That may have been a powerful sneeze, but he also had a satisfied smile on his face. Well, I'll be darned, Knuckles said to himself, but then he turned to Sonic and gave him a smile as well as a thumbs up. Nice going, dude! From there, the remainder of Sonic's friends praised him as well. Way to go, Sonic! Tails cheered for Sonic. You solved the mystery and defeated Eggman again. Thank you so much, Sonic, Rouge said with a smile. You really are our hero, said Amy. Sonic kept his smile. Well, what can I say? Saving the day is what I do best. Though, aren't you guys missing something? Oh, right, Knuckles said. Gesundheit, Gesundheit, Tails and Knuckles said in unison.
Bless you.
Bless you, Amy and Rouge said, also in unison. Sonic smiled as he continued to rub his nose. Thanks. He brought out his tissue they had retrieved from the robot, then blew his nose and wiped it a few times. Anyone up for some tissues? Everyone laughed in agreement, and then the curtains fell. The musical was over, and the curtain call followed. And that's Detective Sonic the Musical, Sonic called. Each of the characters came out to wave to the audience. Even Eggman was able to return in time for the curtain call, though he didn't receive nearly as much applause compared to the other characters. Thanks for watching our show. See you guys next time, Sonic said with a wink. I gotta say, Sonic, that was pretty awesome, Knuckles said as the cast went back behind the curtains. I think I liked the shape of the ending the best, Tails said with a chuckle. Yeah, me too, said Sonic. Thanks for doing this with me, guys. We may have sneezed a lot, but that performance of ours was way past cool. It sure was, said Knuckles.
Yeah, definitely,
Amy agreed. Absolutely, Rouge said, and Tails nodded in agreement. Well, except for when you beat me again, Eggman mentioned. Mark my words, Sonic, you'll never see the last of me! Despite his warning, however, Sonic and his friends didn't pay any heed. Eggman figured they wouldn't, so he turned around and left, muttering to himself in dismay. By the way, Sonic, I have some more tissues if you need any, Tails mentioned. Thanks, Tails, Sonic said. With his next sentence, his hand reached up to rub his nose again with his forefinger, almost without realizing. I think we've had enough sneezing for a while. His friends laughed in agreement as Sonic continued to rub his nose. The musical had been a success, and everyone who saw it enjoyed it, almost as much as Sonic and his friends enjoyed performing in it. They were already looking forward to the next musical they would do, though it might be a while before they come up with a better one than this. By the way, a few weeks after the musical had ended, Sonic and Eggman resumed their rivalry the next time they met. Some things just never changed after all. The end. Phew. Am I glad that's over. Thanks for listening to this story, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I know my singing voice isn't that great, but I gave it the best I could. And I know my voice doesn't really fit any of the Sonic characters that well, but I still had fun narrating this, and I hope you enjoyed it. I think I'm gonna get a drink of water now.